of the Lord into the house of the God.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom to all our subscribers and to those who happen to come across our video for this Shabbat. We're at the Haftarah section, and we want to welcome back Eric, our Zaken. He had some family events to attend to over the past 2 weeks, so we haven't had the pleasure of hearing his messages on the Haftarah portion. So it's a blessing to have him back, and looking forward to it. So
Brother Tony.
good to have you back. Really.
Good to be back.
Bless you. All right.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So this week's Haftarah reading comes from Shof'tim, Judges, chapter 11. We're going to look at verses 1 through 33. And this is the story of Yiftach, who was the 8th judge of Israel. So if you remember, Israel had 6 major and 6 minor Shof'tim, 12 total. And Yiftach was the son of Gilead by a prostitute or harlot, and was driven away by his brothers. The elders of Gilead brought him back, make him their chief. And he will fight the Ammonites, and he will conquer a number of cities. And in the end, he makes a foolish vow, cost him his daughter's life. And so we will read some of his story, at least the beginning, and we'll see how this connects into our Torah portion. Now Yiftach, a brave soldier from Gilead, was the son of a prostitute. His father, Gilead, had other sons by his wife, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Yiftach away and told him, "You will not inherit from our father because you are another woman's son." Then Yiftach fled from his brothers and lived in the territory of Tov, where he enlisted a gang of rowdies who would go out raiding with him. After a while, the people of Ammon made war against Israel. When the army of Ammon attacked Israel, the leaders of Gilead went to fetch Yiftach from the territory of Tov and said to him, "Come and be our chief so that we can fight the army of Ammon." Yiftach answered the leaders of Gilead, "Didn't you hate me so much that you forced me out of my father's house? Why are you coming to me now when you're in trouble?" The leaders of Gilead replied, "Here is why we've come back to you now. If you lead us in war with the people of Ammon, you will be head over everyone living in Gilead." Yiftach answered them, "If you bring me back home to fight the army of Ammon, and Adonai defeats them for me, I will be your head." The leaders of Gilead said to Yiftach, "Adonai is witness that we promised to do what you have said." Then Yiftach went with the leaders of Gilead, and the people made him head and chief over them. Yiftach repeated all these conditions at Mitzpah in the presence of Adonai. Yiftach sent messengers to the king of the people of Ammon to say, "What's your problem with us? Why are you invading our territory?" The king of Ammon answered the messenger of Yiftach, "Because Israel took away my territory when they came up from Egypt. They took everything from the Arnon to the Yabok and the Yarden. Now restore it peacefully. Yiftach sent messengers again to the king of the people of Ammon with this response. Here is what Yiftach has to say. Israel captured neither the territory of Moab nor the territory of the people of Ammon. But when Israel came up from Egypt, walked through the desert to the Red Sea, and arrived at Kadesh, then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom to say, "Please let us pass through your land." But the king of Edom wouldn't let them. He sent a similar message to the king of Moab, but neither would he. So Israel stayed at Kadesh. Then they walked through the desert around the territory of Edom and the territory of Moab, past the east border of the territory of Moab, and pitched camp on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not cross the border into Moab, for the Arnon was the border of Moab. Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorite and king of Heshbon, with this message: "Please let us pass through your land to our own place." But Sihon did not trust that Israel would only pass through his land, so he gathered all his people together, pitched camps in Yahatz, and fought against Israel. Adonai, the God of Israel, handed Sihon and all his people over to Israel, and they killed them. Thus Israel possessed all the territory of the Amorite who lived there. They took possession of all the territory of Amorite, from the Arnon to the Yabok, and from the desert to the Jordan. So now that Adonai, the God of Israel, has expelled the Amorite before his people, Israel, do you think that you will expel us? You shouldn't just keep the territory. You should just keep the territory your God Chemosh has given you, while we, for our part, will hold on to whatever Adonai, our God, has given us of the lands that belonged to others before us. Really, are you better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever pick a quarrel with Israel or fight with us? Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, in Aurora and its villages, and in all the cities on the banks of the Arnon for 300 years. Why didn't you take them back during that time? No, I have done you no wrong, but you are doing me wrong to war against me. May Adonai the judge be judged today between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. But the king of the people of Ammon paid no attention to the messenger Yiftach sent him. Then the spirit of Adonai came upon Yiftach, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, on through Mitzpah and Gilead, and from there over to the people of Ammon. Yiftach made a vow to Adonai: "If you will hand the people of Ammon over to me, then whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon will belong to Adonai. I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." So Yiftach crossed over to fight the people of Ammon, and Adonai handed them over to him. He killed them from Aurora until you reach Minet, 20 cities all the way from Avel Kramim. It was a massacre. So the people of Ammon were defeated before the people of Israel. And so, obviously, the connection here to our Torah portion is he literally gives a history lesson here, speaking of this event that happened in the past, and which happened in the Torah portion here, about them trying to pass through Moab and being denied, trying to pass through Edom and also being denied. And just as a reminder, keep in mind that if you remember who Moab and Ammon are, so if we go back to Genesis, Thus, both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father, right? So this is the incestuous act that happens in Genesis. The older one gave birth to a son called Moab. He is the ancestor of Moab to this day. The younger also gave birth to a son, and she called him Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the people of Ammon to this day. So these two territories are occupied by the descendants of Lot through the act where his daughters sleep with him in Genesis. So as I read this, again, it's obvious how it connects to our Torah portion, because Yiftach literally gives a history lesson. He refers back to the Torah portion and says, hey, don't you remember what happened in the past? We didn't steal your land. We were denied access, and you attacked us. We were just camping out there, and the God of Israel protected us, and we ended up possessing that land. And what I find interesting, as I thought about this, is how often this testimony, this history of Israel, appears throughout the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures. So in Deuteronomy, Moshe brings it up again. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 30, he says, "But Sihon, king of Heshbon, would not let us pass through his territory because Adonai your God had hardened his spirit and made him stubborn, so that he could hand him over to you, as is the case today." Right? So we get this hardening of this king Sihon, his heart. So Moses talks about it. And then we fast forward to the end of the Torah and the beginning of the prophets, and we see Joshua in chapter 2 brings it up again. Verses 8 through 10, he says, "The two men had not yet laid down when she returned to the roof and said to them, 'I know that Adonai has given you land. Fear of you has fallen on us. Everyone in the land is terrified at the thought of you. We've heard how Adonai dried up the water in the Sea of Suf about ahead of you when you left Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorite and the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, that you completely destroyed them.'" So here we have Rahab in the book of Joshua referring to this same incident. And then again in Joshua 24, on verse 8, he says, "I brought you into the land of the Amorite, living beyond the Jordan. They fought against you, but I handed them over to you. You took possession of their land, and I destroyed them ahead of you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, rose up to fight against Israel. He sent and summoned Balaam, the son of Beor, to put a curse on you, but I refused to listen to Balaam, and he actually blessed you. In this way, I rescued you from him." So this is another reference to this Torah portion, and the next Torah portion, which is Balak, will shed even more light on that. Nehemiah talks about it in Nehemiah 9:22. "You gave them kingdoms and peoples. You even gave them extra land so that they took possession of the land of Sihon, also the land of the kings of Heshbon, and the land of Og, king of Bashan." And then, of course, David makes several references to this in the Psalms. Just one of those Psalms, Psalms 135. He says, "He struck many nations and slaughtered mighty kings, Sihon, king of the Amorite, Og, king of Bashan, and all the kingdoms of Canaan. Then he gave their land as a heritage to be possessed by Israel, his people." And so, again, we have this, this is the beginning, really, of entering into the Promised Land. So we see that the Israelites are slowly acquiring more and more land, and God is delivering this into the hands of Israel, right? They're defeating these giants, these people that seem to be more powerful than Israel, but through God, they are conquering this. So this story is retold over and over. It's told by Moses, it's told by Joshua, it's told by Yiftach, it's told by Rahab, it's told by Nehemiah, it's told by David. It's kind of interesting how often this story is told, right? This great deliverance by God into the hands of Israel. And so, I think on a deeper level, this Torah portion and the accompanying Haftarah portion really seem to be a theme of leadership, right? Well, obviously, we're launching into that with the book of Judges, the book of Kings, are really about leadership, right? Right leaders and wrong leaders. And this even goes into our Torah portion, because in our Torah portion in chapter 20 of Numbers, verse 12, we see the downfall, or the inability of leadership here of Moses and Aaron, right? So it says, "But Adonai said to Moshe and Aaron, because you did not trust in me, so as to cause me to be regarded as holy by the people of Israel, you will not bring this community into the land I have given them." So this is really a big deal, because up until this point, Moses and Aaron, I mean, they're leading the entire nation of Israel through this. And this is really where their leadership comes into question. And neither one of them makes it into the promised land, and they certainly don't lead Israel into the promised land. In fact, it will be Joshua, who is only one of two from that generation, who actually enters the promised land. So if you remember, Joshua and Caleb were the two of the 12 spies that believed that God would hand these territories over and these people over. Everyone else was nervous. They were scared, and they said these lands were possessed by giants, and there was no way that they would be able to conquer them. And so, even in our Torah portion, there's this theme of leadership, and what does that look like? And I think it's an interesting theme throughout the entire Scripture, because it would seem to me that Israel overall really was terrible at choosing their leaders. And we see the sort of progression of what that looks like. We get to King David, who is considered the greatest leader of Israel of all time. And then we degrade down through the book of Kings. And we see how poor leadership ultimately creates a lot of issues for Israel and for their relationship with God. And it's interesting, because if we look back a few judges, a few chapters, and we start to contrast some of these ideas. So I'm going to read from Judges 8. This is Gideon. "The men of Israel said to Gideon, 'Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you saved us from the power of Midian.' Gideon replied, 'Neither I nor my son will rule over you. Adonai will rule over you.'" So That's a very stark contrast to what we have in Judges chapter 11, verse 9 with Yiftach, because what does Yiftach say? He says, Yiftach answered them, "If you bring me back to fight the army of Ammon, and Adonai defeats them for me, I will be your head." Right? So, two completely different perspectives on leadership here. Right? Yiftach wants power. He wants control. He's a great warrior, but his motives are a little bit skewed. Right? He wants power, and seems like he's holding a little bit of resentment. Right? He was chased out of town because he was the son of a prostitute. And so his motivations are questionable, especially when we compare them to Gideon, who basically says, I'm not here to rule over anyone, right? Adonai rules over you. And that's a very similar contrast to what we have with Shaul, with King Saul and King David, right? It's said that King David was a man after God's own heart, but yet when you compare their lives in terms of sin, David did some pretty horrific things, right? What did Saul ever really do? He didn't murder anyone, he didn't commit adultery. But the issue with King Saul was that he was weak. He was a weak leader, and it was because of pride, his insecurities, right? So you remember, David kills Goliath, and then all of Israel, they're like, King Saul killed 1,000 men, but David killed 10,000, right? And he got jealous, and he ends up over and over basically pursuing David. In contrast, David has many opportunities to take Saul out. I mean, Saul's trying to kill him. And David's like, no, it's not my place. God anointed him as leader, and God will deal with him. It's not my place to deal with him. And so David's claim to fame really is that as many issues as he had in his life, he took ownership of them, right? I mean, what we would call today repentance. So he recognized his acts of sin, and he always repented and turned back to God. He never made excuses, whereas Saul was just filled with tons of excuses, right? It was never his fault. It was always, he always put the blame on somebody else. And again, these are all leadership traits, right, that we can reflect on and try to extract some wisdom of what's going on here throughout the history of Israel and their kings and their judges, to try to understand what does a good leader look like and what are those traits. And I went into the Marine Corps when I was 17, right? Which is a pivotal time in any young man's life. And so I guess I have presuppositions of what leadership looks like through that, but I can tell you that the military does a really good job of teaching you what leadership should look like. And during peacetime, you'll definitely have poor leaders in there, but certainly during times of combat, the true leaders tend to rise to the top. And it reminds me of something that General Patton said, and it's kind of a theme in military leadership training, but Patton said, always do everything you ask of those you command. And in military leadership training, that often summarized as leading from the front. You always lead from the front. You never lead from the rear, by delegating a bunch of things and asking people to do things that you would never do yourself, right? Usually it starts by you doing those things, and people just tend to follow. And I guess in church terms, how we would say that today, definitely how Yeshua said it, is that if you want to be a leader, you have to be of service, right? You need to serve those that you lead. It's not the other way around. We often have it twisted that if I lead, then everyone serves me. But it starts with me serving those who I lead, and then they will naturally follow. And so that's just, something to think about, especially as you read through, again, Judges and the book of Kings, because really, when you start to compare and contrast the different leadership styles, it's very interesting from a biblical perspective to kind of meditate on what does good leadership look like. What would that look like, especially in the church today, because there really does seem to be a lack of good leadership. But it should be no surprise to us because we see that throughout the scriptures. But it's dangerous, right? And we can obviously even talk politically of what's going on today and about leadership. But I'll just end with this one last thought, bringing the Gospels back in. So if you look at the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, which is the, sort of the heroes of the faith, right? This is where the author of Hebrews is talking about trust and faith and all these heroes. And in verse 32, he says, "What more should I say? There isn't time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Yiftach, David, Shmuel, and the prophets who, through trusting, conquered kingdoms, worked righteousness, received what was promised, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, and had their weaknesses turned to strength, grew mighty in battle, and routed foreign armies." And so Yiftach is mentioned there. So going back to sort of how many times this theme is reiterated through the scriptures and just in Jewish culture and Jewish thought, we see once again, even closer toward the end of the scriptures, in what we would call the New Testament, we still see references to what Yiftach does here. And so he wasn't the perfect judge by any means. None of these guys are, but God used them, and He used their character to achieve certain things. And the best that we can do is try to look at some of those traits of what would seem to indicate to be a good leader, and sort of meditate on that. So that's what I have from today's Haftarah reading.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot in there.
There's a lot.
A lot in there.
Wow, a lot of history.
Yeah.
A lot of history.
A lot of points in leadership that characterize Saul and David that is a really good roadmap to understand what God is looking for in a person. And the thing that weaves and streams throughout the scriptures is what Moshe and Aaron had done all the way up to this point, as Eric had mentioned, do it accordingly as I have ordered you. And we see in this last event with I get into the message, the striking of the rock. Moses didn't do it according to as God had ordered him to do. That was a drawback in whatever happened is something to really look at. It doesn't really say there. So, all right, thank you, Eric. Baruch Hashem. There's more we can get into on this in some discussions. So, thank you.
Jacob, my servant, hear now, O Israel, it was I